Lots of noise again in the last 7 to 10 days coming out of the ACC conference, but that's all it is noise. I could probably make this just a 30-second video of brief thoughts and tell you nothing's happening. I don't think. I don't think anything drastic or dramatic, anything of real consequence or significance is happening to the ACC or within the ACC. In other words, I don't think anybody's leaving. Not today, not tomorrow, not next week, not next month, not next off season. I guess that could be the end of the video. If you just want the highlights, there you go. You can click off. But a couple of points here I want to get into when it comes to the ACC, and I'm going to start here. I am biased. I am biased in that and I've said this a bunch of times, I am not looking for college football to go to some sort of two super conference model. I don't want that. I don't think it would be good overall for the state of college football nationally. We already are kind of, well, look, some people consider this trash talking, what I'm about to say. This is just reality, okay? There are already certain pockets of this country that, generally speaking, care way more about college football than others. That's just a fact. It's not trash talk. Okay, the southeastern United States, in general, cares the absolute most about college football. The Midwest is next. Okay, then you've got, I would say, probably the Southwest, if you want to include, say, Texas and Oklahoma in that, or even Arizona. Okay, after that, you fight it out between the West Coast and the Northeast. Probably the West Coast is next with, obviously California, a lot of high school talent there, particularly Southern California. Then you got Southern Cal, which obviously cares a great deal about football, the university I'm talking about, as well as UCLA. And then up the West Coast, you've got Oregon and Washington. Not great high school football there, but two universities in Oregon and Washington that are all in on football. The Northeast is kind of its own separate deal. It's just an NFL part of the country. It is what it is. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't somebody somewhere on the West Coast in California, Oregon, Washington, hell, in Idaho, who loves college football just as much or more than me or your average college football fan in the Southeast. That's not what I'm saying. I'm speaking in general terms here. Okay, so we already know that. Now, this has led to some disparity in college football, in my opinion. I think this is why you see a lot of Southeastern schools doing really, really well in college football compared to a lot of schools in other parts of the country. Forget the fact that they're in the quote-unquote Southeastern Conference, because this includes some ACC schools as well. And we talk about Southeastern United States, right? And now, hell, a Big 12 school in Central Florida. But this is just a reality. So to ignore that or to pretend that that's not the case, you're just lying to yourself. And that has an effect on what is going on now within the world of college football. TV deals is an excellent example of this, right? Who's having the hardest time signing a TV deal? The Pac-12. Why? Because whatever TV deal the Pac-12 signs, it's going to become kind of a regional network, a regional deal. I have tried to get people down here to become interested in the Pac-12. They're just not. Some of that's the Pac-12's fault. They sort of neglected football for the better part of a decade, and now nationally they're suffering the consequences of that. But I'm not looking for college football to go to some kind of two super conference deal. That's not what I want. So I'm a little bit biased, maybe in my opinions, when it comes to the ACC and even some of these other conferences. But this is about the ACC, so let's just stick with that for now. First of all, we're partly to blame for this part of this too. The ACC is not a terrible football conference. It's just not, okay? Now, I understand the trash talk. And look, the SEC and the Big Ten are clearly head and shoulders above the other three conferences when it comes to football. I don't care what metric you want to use. If you want to look at wins, better teams, top 25, whatever it is you want to look at, okay? The Big Ten and the SEC in general right now are playing the best football in the country. It wasn't always the case, and it may not be the case at some point in the future, but that is the case right now. But the ACC is a good football conference. It's being hurt right now because a couple of its premier football brands have had some downtime, right? Florida State, now it looks like they might be getting ready to turn the corner and become somewhat relevant again. But Miami has been down really since joining the ACC back in 2004. I think they only have one 10-win season since joining the ACC. I know they've never won the ACC. They only won their division once. They've been down. And yeah, that hurts the ACC overall. But Clemson has won a couple of national titles in the last 10 years. That's more national titles than the Big Ten has won in the last 10 years, okay? Florida State won a national title in 2013. I mean, so even in the last 10 years, the ACC has 3 national titles. 1 from Florida State, 2 from Clemson. That's more than the Big Ten. That doesn't mean I think the ACC is better than the Big Ten overall. Clearly it's not right now, but if you're going off national titles, it is what it is. So you've got sort of the clear big 3 in the ACC in terms of football brand recognition. Miami, Florida State, and Clemson. And the ACC needs Florida State and Miami to be competitive. That's a fact. But there's some other schools within the ACC as well who, for whatever reason, have not been consistently among the top 15, 20, 25 programs in the country, but I think really could be, probably should be, and need to be in order for the ACC to hope to close the revenue gap that currently exists between the ACC, the Big Ten, and the SEC, right? Let's talk about the state of North Carolina. Now, there is a lot of big-time universities in the state of North Carolina, right? You're talking about North Carolina. You're talking about Duke. You're talking about NC State. Talking about Wake Forest. It seems to me the state of North Carolina, who has a pretty good high school football program. It's a pretty good recruiting area. I don't know where they rank nationally in terms of states, but there's some good high school football played in North Carolina. I think there's a couple of universities in that state that clearly care a great deal about college football, North Carolina and NC State in particular. It seems like North Carolina as a state needs to have a premier football program. And what I mean is a football program that is reliably and consistently within the top 25. Now, North Carolina has been a top 25 team from time to time over the last 10 or 15, 20 years. NC State has been a top 25 team from time to time over the last 10, 15, 20 years. Even Wake Forest and Duke have had good years here and there. But none of those teams have been consistently a top 25-ish type team, right? Think about some of the bigger states across the country when you think about high school or college football. They almost all have at least one sort of powerhouse program that even if they're not reeling off national title after national title, they're a consistent player in the world of college football, right? Florida, someone's always good there. Georgia, you got Georgia. Alabama, sometimes Auburn. You go around the country, you see that. North Carolina needs that. Could it be North Carolina? Could it be NC State? Those, to me, are the two sort of obvious choices. What about the state of Virginia? Whatever happened to Virginia Tech? Golly, you got to be my age. I'm in my mid-40s. You've got to be my age to remember when Virginia Tech mattered in the world of college football. But they did. They mattered a lot. You have to go way back to when Mike Vick was there and even before that. But Virginia Tech used to be a good, respectable football program. Not lately. Not lately. And the same for Virginia. It seems to me the state of Virginia should have a consistent, reliable, top 25-ish type football program, and they just don't. It's been a long, long time since either of those two schools, Virginia or Virginia Tech, really mattered nationally in the world of college football. The ACC is in a position with the schools they currently have, in my opinion, to be competitive with both the SEC and the Big Ten, even an expanded SEC and Big Ten. If there was ever a year where the ACC could get it together and Miami, Florida State, and Clemson, all had 8, 9+ win seasons, and then you get a school out of North Carolina to step up and a school out of Virginia to step up, you're talking about 4, 5, or 6 teams within the ACC that, in my opinion, have the potential to become a consistent player in the world of college football, to become relevant nationally in the world of college football. That is more than enough to support that conference, to prop that conference up, and to get that conference where it needs to be, revenue-wise, to compete with the Big Ten and the SEC. I truly feel that way. Now, some of the other conferences, I'm not so sure. But just stack up the football programs within the ACC to the football programs within the Big 12 once Texas and Oklahoma leave. If I were going to ask you to bet on either the ACC or as it currently stands now, or the Big 12 as it will stand after Texas and Oklahoma leave, if I were to tell you over the next 50 years, which one of those two conferences do you feel more comfortable betting on to win more national titles in football? You're clearly going with the ACC over the Big 12, and the Pac-12 post Southern Cal UCLA once they bolt for the Big 10. I think you could say the same thing. So the ACC, at worst, is in third place currently in the world of college football. And look, if some of those teams sort of pick themselves up out of the gutter, the Miamis that have just been kind of scrounging around for 20 years, if a North Carolina team can step up, a Virginia team can step up, and then you're always going to have that one or two teams, and this happens in every conference, you're going to have those one or two teams from year to year that have that pop year now and then, right? A Wake Forest that wins 9 or 10 games like what happened a couple of years ago. Syracuse, Pitt. These are other teams that are capable of having these pop years from time to time. But when you're talking about teams that have the ability to consistently rank within the top 25 in college football, I think the ACC's got 5 or 6 they should be able to rely on. Miami, Florida State, Clemson, one team from North Carolina, one team from Virginia. And if that happens, I think the ACC would be in a much better place financially when it comes to negotiations with a future TV partner, whoever that might be. Now that gets us to their current TV deal, and this is really the big problem. Nothing I have said in this video up to this point really matters when it comes to their current TV deal, which they're just not going to be able to get out of. That's just the reality of the situation. I'm not going to get into all the details and bore you with explanations of grants of rights and what all that means, but basically if Florida State were to decide tomorrow they wanted to leave the ACC, and let's say the SEC said, okay, we'll take you. The SEC extends Florida State an invitation. Florida State accepts it. Florida State joins the SEC. Guess who gets all of Florida State's TV money from now until 2036, no matter what conference Florida State is in? The ACC. That's what the grant of rights deal means, and it's airtight. It's going to be almost impossible to get out of it. 99.99% chance that no member institution in the ACC is getting out of that grant of rights deal. So that means that even if a Florida State, for example, decided to leave and go play in the SEC, right? Any money earned is going to go straight to the ACC, not to the SEC, not to Florida State. So why would the SEC bring Florida State in when the ACC is still going to be getting the revenue generated from their TV deal? So there's just next to no chance at all that the ACC is breaking apart, splitting up, teams leaving, anything like that, anytime in the immediate future. And the ACC is going to be in even worse shape 4 or 5 years down the road, unfortunately, financially, because they're locked in until 2036. The Big Ten, who just signed a deal, and the SEC, who just signed a deal right before that, both of their contracts come up before this current ACC deal comes up again in 2036. So the Big Ten is going to renegotiate again before the ACC. The SEC is going to renegotiate again before the ACC. So the Big Ten and the SEC are making a ton more money now than the ACC. And when they renegotiate again, it's going to be before the ACC, which means they're going to be making even more compared to the ACC. So I completely understand the frustration that you hear from athletic directors and presidents at places like Florida State and Clemson and whoever else. Florida State is getting shafted in terms of revenue, but the reality is this is the case in every single conference. You're either getting the benefit or you're suffering the consequence of the revenue. In other words, who do you think is worth more to the SEC, Alabama or Vanderbilt? They get the same amount of money. That's the way these things work, okay? ESPN, Fox, whoever has these TV deals, they're not paying the schools, okay? They're not paying Alabama this amount of money and then paying Vandy that amount of money and then paying Ole Miss that amount of money. No, they pay the conference. They pay the SEC a lump sum, okay? The SEC then goes, okay, well, we got 14 teams. Let's split this check 14 ways. And they mail every team a check. Everybody gets the same. It's always worked this way. Now, Florida State and a couple of the other programs in the ACC are crying because, well, we're worth more money, More people watch Florida State games than watch Wake Forest games. We're more valuable as a TV product than Pitt is. Yes, you are. You definitely are. No question. No doubt about it. But trying to get more money because of that, we'll see. Now, the ACC is working on something now where maybe they're going to do like if an ACC team makes the college football playoff or advances, within the college football playoff, they then become entitled to a bigger piece of the pie, so to speak. So we'll see. So, then by default, a Florida State, for example, if they were to make the playoffs, would make more that year than, say, Pitt or Syracuse. However, if Florida State were to have if that deal goes through and Florida State were to have a down year, and let's say a Pitt makes the playoffs, well, guess what? Pitt's going to get more money than Florida State would that year. So we'll see what the ACC ends up doing. But the bottom line is, I don't think the sky is falling. I don't think the Stuart Little routine is necessary here. I think the ACC is going to weather this storm. There's going to be some rough times. There is going to be a financial disparity between the ACC and the Big Ten and the SEC. There's just nothing that can happen to fix that. There's just not. I mean, no one held a gun to the ACC's head and made them sign the current deal that they're in, which every member institution had to sign off on, by the way. This wasn't like some rogue commissioner just went out and made a deal on his own in the dark in a secret room somewhere and didn't tell anybody. All 14 of these schools in the ACC signed off on this deal. Now you fast forward a few years later, the Big Ten and the SEC have new deals, and everybody in the ACC sitting around going, I can't believe we signed that terrible deal. Well, you did. Not only was it a terrible deal, you agreed to way too long of a term there with that thing running through 2036. But I don't think the ACC is going away. I don't think the SEC is expanding tomorrow and taking Florida State or Miami or Clemson or any North Carolina school or anything like that. Could it happen at some point down the road? Of course it could. I mean, look, after what we've seen the last 2 or 3 off seasons with Texas and Oklahoma and Southern Cal and UCLA and all that, I would never say never about anything. But I would be surprised if anything happens within the ACC, primarily because of that grant of rights deal. And like I said, I hope the ACC can get it figured out. I think college football is better nationally when there are relevant programs and conferences coast to coast. I'm not looking for an NFL model where we just have 2 conferences, a Big Ten with 20-something teams and an SEC with 20-something teams. I mean, hell, half the fun of being a fan of a team in the SEC is bragging about beating teams in other conferences. Well, if there's only one other conference to brag, it just takes something away from it. So anyway, that's my thoughts on everything going on within the ACC. Yes, they're crying. No, there's not a whole lot they can do about it. Have a great day.